Welcome back to Live Cool Davis. Today's episode, we're going to continue our conversation with Kristen Heinemeyer about effectively cooling our homes in Davis. In our last episode, she explained about the energy savings potential to avoid peak energy. She explained how using the Delta Breeze, windows, and fans can really help avoid AC usage in the evening. She also talked about pre-cooling our homes to avoid peak energy usage. Let's revisit that idea and dive a little deeper into keeping your home cool while avoiding peak energy usage.
I try to be smart about when I run my AC.
Can you explain a little more about being smart about when you run your AC?
Well, I try to avoid peak energy use. So when we use electricity during this peak time from 4 to 9 p.m., the sun has set, so no solar power, right? But at that time when the supply is going down and the demand is going up, electric utility company is forced to tap into their dirtier sources of energy like fossil fuels. So I try to avoid using electricity during those hours. This is referred to as load shifting. I shift when I use my electricity to either before or after the peak times. And I know that I'm not stressing out the utility system or the grid. Utilities even have special rates to encourage this kind of load shifting. Time of use rates are when electricity is cheap off-peak and expensive on-peak.
4 to 9 p.m. is the hottest part of the day. Dinner's prepping and everyone is home. I think that's when many of us want to use our AC. How do we shift AC to off-peak?
Well, we can do it, but we do have to plan ahead. The strategy I use to keep my house cool includes pre-cool my house, which means running my AC a little cooler than usual and a little earlier in the day. Make sure my house is nice and cool before the peak period kicks in at about 4 o'clock. Then I can coast through the peak period without using my AC, and I do this by using my thermostat smartly.
Kristen, this strategy is very effective, but it does sound a little bit complicated. Do we need to use a smart thermostat to pre-cool?
No, well, you can do it with a smart thermostat, but really you can do this with any basic programmable thermostat. Personally, I have just about the cheapest programmable thermostat I could find, and it works just great for this. And it's not as hard to program the thermostat for pre-cooling as you might think. All you need to do is set the thermostat cooling setting to about 75 degrees from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. on summer weekdays. And for all the other periods for the rest of the day, set it at a much higher temperature. I use 83 degrees, but essentially it could be any really high temperature that'll make sure that the AC doesn't kick in anytime except 12 to 4.
75 seems like a really low temperature setting for the summer. Cool Davis usually recommends a 78-degree set point in the summer. Can you explain why you set it so low and why you don't think it's very wasteful?
Yeah, it does sound wasteful, but for precooling, you do need to cool down the walls and floors and all your furniture a bit extra earlier in the day, so you can enjoy all that cool later in the day and coast through the peak period without running the AC. Now, you don't want to start much earlier in the day because some of the coolth will eventually sort of leak out of the house, but starting at about noon seems to work well. Here, let me show you a video about how I program my thermostat. And remember, every thermostat model is a little bit different, so you may have to modify this a little bit, but it should give you some tips. Here's how I program my thermostat. What I have here is just a pretty standard programmable thermostat. Really, kind of on the low end, but has all the functionality that you need for this. One thing you'll note is it's sitting on my table, not on the wall, and that's because it's much easier to program when you can just sit down and get it just right. You don't have to be standing and leaning over. So you just unplug it, program it, and then plug it right back in. So this thermostat, you see it shows the time, the temperature. It's got some buttons set for setting the program, hold if I want to hold something, which I try to avoid doing anytime, run, which stops the setting and tells it, okay, start running. Up and down arrows, this is where you do a temporary override if you just for a short time you want to be warmer or cooler. You'll notice down here there's heating off and cooling, and then fan, auto, and on. So for pre-cooling, you want this to be in cooling mode. You want the fan to be in auto. You pretty much always want the fan to be in auto. There's not many reasons to have it on. I'm going to show you now how to set the program for pre-cooling. So I push set to put it in the programming mode. You'll see here, the first thing it shows me is the time, and I can make that higher, set that, make sure it matches what's on the clock. That's right now, so I hit set to lock that in. Now it's showing me the day of the week. It's Sunday, so that's good. I need that I'm programming for Monday through Friday. This is the wake period, the first period, showing the time and the temperature. So I can adjust the time whenever I want this first one to start. And it really doesn't matter, this one, for pre-cooling. I'm just going to set this at, I don't know, 6 o'clock. The important thing then, I hit set to store it. The temperature, though, is what I really want to set. And this, I set it for almost all the periods at 83 degrees. Pretty high temperature, just to make sure the air conditioner doesn't turn on. I hit set to lock that in. So now we're setting the second period, leave. This is the one I'm going to use for pre-cooling. So I want it to start at noon. So I push it up a bunch of times to noon. Oops, too far. Okay, noon. That's when I want the pre-cooling to start. So I set to lock that in. This is where, oh, it's already the right temperature. 75 is where I want it for pre-cooling. So that's right. So I hit set. The third period, return. This is what I'm using for the peak period. So I have it set at 4. That's when the peak period starts. This is where I want the temperature to be high because I don't want the air conditioner to turn on during the peak period. So I set it to 83. Set to lock it in. Might as well set this for the end of the peak period, although this ending point doesn't really matter as much because you're not going to need cooling that time probably. So set for 9 o'clock set, and the temperature once again, 83. So you notice they're all 83 except for the pre-cooling time where it's 75. So set to lock that in. Now it's showing me I can change the settings for Saturdays and Sundays. This you can do pretty much whatever you want with those because there's really not a peak period. So I'm just going to leave it where it is for now. So I'll hit run to just lock all that in. So my thermostat now is set, ready to go for pre-cooling, and I can plug it back on the wall and get going with pre-cooling. And remember, anytime you're too hot, you can always turn the AC back on by hitting the down button a few times to get to a good temperature. And remember, that will do it temporarily. Don't whatever on your thermostat is, don't use a permanent hold because then you'll forget about it. And for the rest of the summer, you'll be using lots of AC. So there you have it. Not too hard, right? See, pretty easy, huh? Now I know that 83 degrees sounds really hot, but don't worry, things are working well. It'll never actually get to that temperature. And of course, if you get too hot, you can always use the down arrows to lower the temperature a few degrees anytime you want. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing, but do make sure that it's a temporary override and not a permanent hold. Because you can just give it a try for a few days and fine tune it to work for you. To really show how this works, let me share my screen and I'll show you some temperature measurements that I took at my house on one particular day. Okay, Christy, hopefully you're seeing my screen. On this day in this chart, you can see the outside temperature, this green line, went from about 60 early in the morning to about 95 degrees later in the day. And then you see this other line, and the brown line is the temperature inside my house. So you can see that on this day it started off nice and cool. Remember, I keep my windows open and put a box fan in my window, so it's usually nice and cool. As soon as I get up, though, I close up all the windows and trap all that nice cool air inside before it starts heating up outside. And once I did that on this day, the inside temperature started to climb, and my house reached my pre-cool set point of 75 degrees by about 2 o'clock. So you see, it didn't even start at noon. It didn't get to that temperature until about 2 o'clock. So at that point, you can see this squiggly line here. That's where the AC was turning on and off to keep my home at 75 degrees. So by looking at this, you can see that if I hadn't turned the AC on at this point, if I hadn't pre-cooled, the temperature would have just kept climbing, would have reached 78, 80 degrees just as the peak period was starting, and I would have had to do a lot of air conditioning, definitely. But at this point, at 4 o'clock, when the peak period started, the thermostat automatically changed to 83 degrees. When that happened, the AC stopped running like I wanted it to. But because of the pre-cooling, my home and everything inside it was already nice and cool at 75. So I started the peak period nice and cool. At that point, the temperature naturally started to climb again because the AC wasn't on. And because of how hot it was outside. And then sometime in the middle of the afternoon here, it got to about 78 degrees. So I decided to turn on my ceiling fan, which actually doesn't make things any cooler, but it makes you feel a little bit cooler by a few degrees. And it did allow me to last a bit longer before I became too uncomfortable.
Yes, this is exactly when me and my kids go jump in the pool in our backyard. I really hope public pools can open soon, but in the meantime,
But fortunately, by that point, I knew it was cooling off a bit outside. So I checked my thermostat and I checked the weather. It seemed like it was cool enough outside. I went outside, and sure enough, it was cooler outside than inside. So this is kind of an exciting moment for me. I know that I'll make it now without any more AC, and I know that things are about to start cooling off. So relief is in sight. So at that point, I opened all the windows. As soon as I opened my windows, my house started to cool off, and I was able to coast until the end of the peak period without any air conditioning. So no air conditioning during the peak period. And in fact, it just kept cooling down throughout the evening into the next day until the next afternoon. So the only time the air conditioning ran was from about 2 to 4 p.m.
by using some simple strategies to shift our energy usage off peak, conserve energy on peak, and use renewables and batteries, the Davis community can enjoy a cool home and avoid the fossil fuels associated with peak energy usage. Many in our community are talking about battery backup systems. These systems help ensure energy resiliency in power outages, but they also have the more frequent usage of peak shaving. Peak shaving is when we use batteries that are charged from solar panels off peak and then discharged to power our homes during peak times. Batteries are another piece of the energy puzzle to make sure we maximize renewable energy. Keep an eye out for more Cool Davis resources on battery backup systems. If you have a battery backup system in Davis, we would like to hear your battery story. Email solutions@cooldavis.org or post on social media with the hashtag LiveCoolDavis. But going beyond this, there's another option for our community. Our local energy provider, Valley Clean Energy, offers a 100% renewable rate called Ultra Green. For just 1.5 cents extra per kilowatt hour than the standard rate, you can use energy generated from completely 100% renewable energy sources. Check them out and opt up if you can.
Yeah, that is a great point, Chrissy. And it brings up a common misconception. Many of us believe that if we have our own rooftop solar system or we pay for a little bit more to opt up to the Ultra Green plan, that we don't need to worry about saving energy and don't need to flatten the energy curve and avoid peak energy use. But in fact, whether the solar is on your own rooftop or at the utility central station, it's always a great idea to use electricity when the renewables are generating. And for solar, that's in the middle of the day, around up until around 4 p.m.
Right. Until our entire grid is 100% renewable, we still need to flatten that energy demand curve. I'm glad to be part of this community moving in this direction. Thanks, Kristen Heinemeyer. Thank you for explaining how you manage your home, program your thermostat, and share your home's energy data.
Thanks for having me on, Chrissy. Bye-bye for now.
Bye. That's all for now. I hope you learned a little about how to cool your home while avoiding peak energy usage. If you haven't already, watch our video on using the Delta Breeze to lower nighttime cooling. Please post pictures on social media of you using your windows, enjoying that Delta Breeze, or graphing your home's energy usage, just like Kristen. Use the hashtag LiveCoolDavis. See the resources we mentioned in the description below, and a link to our Cool Solutions page with tons more ideas to save money, avoid waste, and do your part. Hit that like button and subscribe. And until next time, live cool, Davis.